Hello and welcome to Language Ladder. In this video, we'll be exploring one of my favorite poems, The Road Not Taken. I like teaching this poem as much as I like reading it. So we'll be looking at the analysis of the poem, poetic devices used in it, and how we as an individual can relate to it. Watch this carefully to take the quiz in the next video.
Before we begin with the analysis of the poem, here is a small question for you. Imagine you had to choose between these two boxes. Which box would you choose and why? Pause for a second and think about what made you choose the box out of the two. Well, some of you might have liked the look of it. Some of you might have liked a particular color. And some of you might have guessed what could possibly in it and then chose a box. So why did we do this activity? We all have to make choices in our life at some point in time, and we make those choices for different reasons. So here is a poem where the poet is confronted with a choice. That is, he had to choose between two things. So let's read the poem and find out what the choice is about. Let's read the first stanza. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveller, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. So where do you think the poet is as he speaks these lines? Look at these highlighted words. Do they drop any hint? Let's look at this picture clue. Can you now guess where the poet is as he speaks these lines? He is perhaps traveling through a forest where he comes across a fork in the road. So why do you think he uses the word yellow to describe the forest? Let's look at this picture. Can you guess why the word yellow is in this line? Perhaps the word yellow suggests the onset of autumn, when the leaves change colors and they either look yellow, orange or rust. Let's look at the first two lines once again. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. So, the very first two lines of the poem introduce the dilemma that the poet is faced with. It appears that the poet is traveling through a forest, and while walking through the forest, he comes across a fork in the road. That is, where two roads are diverging. So the poet stops there and wonders which road to take. And then he says, sorry. Sorry? Why? Perhaps he expresses his regret that he is a solo traveler and he can only take one road. So he stands there for a long time, trying to look as far and as hard he can. He also tries to figure out what each road has to offer, but he can only see as far as the road takes a bend where the undergrowth is. That is, dense plants and trees, they disrupt the view. Therefore, he cannot see very far. This also in a way represents the metaphor for life. In life, there are several times when we are confronted with a difficult choice, and we often wonder what each choice will lead to in future. However, just like the speaker, we cannot look far or beyond a point. Let's move to the next stanza, the second stanza. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. So, The second stanza starts with the poet's decision to take the other road. Let's look at this phrase a little more closely, as just as fair. The word fair is quite familiar, quite common, but it has multiple connotations. On one hand, it means attractive. On the other hand, it also refers to being right or being unbiased. Since here the word just and fair appear side by side, so we are assuming that the poet intends to justify his choice by calling it fair or the correct choice. So he says the other road, that is the road he chose to take, is as just or as fair as the previous one. Interestingly, in the very next line, he adds that perhaps the other road, the road he chose, is even better because it's grassy and wanted wear, that is, it is less traveled by. And because it is less traveled by, it looks more inviting. That is why it says wanted wear. Let's look at the next two lines. Though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. So what's happening here? The next line once again indicates the speaker's indecisive state of mind as he contradicts what he said in the previous line. He admits that perhaps both the roads have seen equal number of travelers when he says, as for that the passing there, that is the movement of the passengers or the travelers, have been almost equal. So therefore, they almost look the same. Now let's read the third stanza. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Now, before we analyze these lines, let's look at these key words and try to figure out their significance here. Morning, leaves, no steps. So, these three words add more details to the setting of the poem. That is, the time and the place in which the poem is set. We already know that the poem is set in the forest, and it's autumn, as suggested by yellow wood in the first stanza. Here we further gather that it is morning, and the poet can see the fallen leaves on the path, which haven't been trodden upon or haven't been crushed by the footsteps as yet on that particular morning. Let's move to the next part of this stanza. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So what do you think the poet is trying to say here? Is he sure that he'll come back and take the other road sometime in the future? Let's look at these lines once again. Oh, I kept the first for another day. He hopes that he will come back and take the first road some other day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So the poet initially thinks that he'll come back to the first road sometime in the future. However, he knows that it might be difficult for him to come back as one way leads to another. It would be important for us to pause here and try connecting this idea with our lives. We all make choices or decisions in our lives, and one decision leads to another, and it becomes difficult for us to come back and try out the other choice. So let's look at the final stanza. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. So what's the first thing you notice about these lines? Let's look at some key phrases and figure out what these lines mean. Ages and ages hence. That means future or several years down the line. Next, sigh. This sigh could be sad, happy, or maybe sigh of relief. And then there is a pause after I. Perhaps the poet wants to emphasize the decision that he made, the choice he made. So here the poet talks about how he is going to talk about this experience in future. He talks about looking back in time when he was confronted with a difficult choice and how that choice made all the difference in his life. We don't know as yet what the outcome of that choice could be. What he perhaps wants to say that whatever choice he made, in this case, he chose a road less traveled by, and that made all the difference in his life. So the poem in a way highlights the importance of choices that we make in life and how these choices help us design our lives. Now let's look at the poetic devices used in the poem. Let's start with the most obvious one. Can you read the highlighted words? Would, both, stood, could, undergrowth. Can you see a pattern? You will notice that some words rhyme with each other. For instance, would rhymes with stood and could, and both rhymes with undergrowth. So if we label the word with the same sound, for example, would, stood, could labeled as A, and both and undergrowth labeled as B, we can determine the rhyme scheme of this poem, which is A, B, A, B. And this rhyme scheme runs through the entire poem. Now let's see if you can identify the next poetic device from these phrases. Yellow wood, undergrowth. What do they do here? They help you imagine the setting or the place where the poem takes place. So they create a picture in your mind. And what is that poetic device called? Visual imagery. And next is metaphor, which runs through the poem, wherein the entire idea of choosing between the two roads represents the metaphor for life. That is, when we are confronted with a difficult choice and we have to choose between the two options given to us. And next is, can you guess from the highlighted word? Yes, alliteration. Because here, both these words start with the same sound. Time to take a quick look. The first two lines of the poem introduce the dilemma that the poet is faced with, and he stands at a fork in the road trying to make up his mind by guessing what each road has to offer as he tries to look as far as he could. These two roads can also be seen as a metaphor representing the choices we face in life. In the second stanza, the poet talks about his decision of taking the other road, which appears more grassy and less traveled by. However, as soon as he takes that road, he realizes that perhaps both the roads are equally worn out. In the next stanza, he once again compares and talks about how the two roads appear early in the morning. He can see that the fallen leaves have not yet been crushed by the footsteps of the travelers. As a result, both the roads look just the same. In the last stanza, the poet wonders how he would describe this experience down the line. And he ends the poem emphasizing the importance of the choices one makes in life and how it designs the course of one's life. Thank you. And if you found this video helpful and useful, do subscribe to our channel